As expected, the United States and the president reimposing sanctions on Iran on Monday in the wake of the president's decision to withdraw from the nuclear deal that Obama negotiated and signed in 2015. And the president said the sanctions start today. They're going to move further in November to banks. And he said they extend to anybody doing business with Iran. You will not do business with America. These are very serious. Joining us now to help break this down and the Iranian reaction is Eddie Yeranian. He is our man in the Middle East on the John Fredericks Radio Network live in Cairo. And he's been on the John Fredericks Radio Network since the beginning, 8 years. And we're happy to have him. Eddie, good to have you, man.
My pleasure, John. The Iranian reaction is mixed, which is to say many Iranians are complaining about the sanctions, but at the same time you see people out in the streets are trying to go out in the streets to demonstrate in at least 10 Iranian cities with video, amateur video showing people who have gone out into the streets. So clearly the Iranian government is under pressure because of these sanctions. Many Iranians, like the former Iranian president Abu Hassan Bani Sadr, whom I spoke with yesterday, told me they're humiliating, and he does not support the government, quite definitely. And he said that people are suffering or in danger of suffering from famine. I don't think it's quite that bad, but certainly he believes, rightly or wrongly, that some people will not demonstrate because their situation is kind of desperate, and why bother demonstrating when your situation is desperate? There was a very funny video on YouTube, not YouTube, on Twitter, from Iran, showing someone who was watching President Rouhani, the Iranian president, give an hour-long speech last night on Iranian television, and he had a can of beans, and he was pretending to throw it at the TV screen. So I think a lot of Iranians are fed up with their government, but that does not necessarily mean they like the idea of U.S. economic sanctions.
Okay, well, these sanctions are pretty tough. And one of the things that I want to get your opinion on here is the president has said these sanctions are going to extend to any company that does business with Iran is not going to be able to do business in the United States. This is a pretty serious one. It extends to that. And now there's the ability for companies to get waivers, but we understand that the waivers coming from the State Department are going to be very stringent. So you take companies that want to still do business with Tehran, and the perfect example, I said this the other day, is Total Oil in France, which is the largest energy company in France. They're buying 300 barrels a day from Tehran of crude oil. And they said, look, if we can't get 100% U.S. sanction waiver, we can't buy this oil because we do so much business in the United States, we can't jeopardize that. So, yeah, we like to continue to do business with Tehran, but we can't jeopardize our U.S. holdings and our business there, so we're out until we get 100% waiver. I mean, if companies start behaving the way Total is in France, Eddie, I mean, this could have a devastating impact on the Iranian economy, which is in the tank now.
Yes, it already does have a devastating impact, and I do hear a lot of grumbling from France, especially from France, because I studied in France and I know a lot of French people, and France does a lot of business with Iran. They produce Peugeot and Renault automobiles. Their companies, those two companies, have had to pull out. They've also sold airliners, not the Airbus planes. Those they have not delivered, but they did deliver the regional passenger jet planes, I believe, on Sunday before the sanctions went into effect. They will not be able to do that after the sanctions go into effect, certainly not if they want to do business in the United States. So it is having a major impact. I think The hope, of course, is that the Iranians will come to the bargaining table, but I don't think that's going to happen. The Iranian president gave a speech last night, and he said, quote, and I'm just quoting the BBC translation. I listened to the original, but this is their translation. He says, I have no preconditions for negotiations. If they are willing to talk about paying back their debts to Iran, meaning the U.S., we have all along been ready for the negotiations. Quote, they owe a lot to Iran. Of course, we're not going to sit down to that. And of course, he knows we're not, and he knows that that's a non-starter, and that's why he said it. And it's not even Rouhani, the Iranian president, who is against talking to President Trump. It's the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. I think everyone knows that. And I think the reason he doesn't want to talk to the U.S. is because we tried to assassinate him 5 times back in the early 1980s. And perhaps that's a good reason not to want to talk to the U.S. But then again, he's a very old man, and God knows he probably doesn't have many more years before him before he departs this mortal coil. So perhaps it's, ultimately they will come to the bargaining table.
I think rejecting the overtures of President Trump to meet with them without preconditions, as the president said when he was asked at the bilateral press conference, I think with the Italian prime minister there, which I was at in the White House, the president said, look, I'll meet with anybody. I don't need preconditions. I'll meet if I can meet with somebody and it can lead to peace, or it can lead to people not being starved to death or not having shortages or leading a better life. I'm certainly going to meet with them and have a conversation. And that got roundly criticized, by the statists and the Kremlinologists, whoever these people are. But in reality, this is the way the president operates. He'll sit down and meet with you. The fact that the Iranians rejected this offer is crazy because, look, Eddie, right now, right today, before these sanctions have taken hold, right, unemployment in Iran is 12%. Inflation is 10%. That's a misery index of 22%. They're running out of money. One buyer for crude oil just canceled. They were selling them 300,000 barrels a day. That's gone. I mean, there's going to be a cash drain, and as unemployment goes up and inflation goes up, they already have a water shortage now. Economic calamity brings people to the streets, and either they're going to get policy change or regime change. Why wouldn't the Iranian government sit down and meet with the president and try to get something worked out? Why?
Well, because the Iranian president is not free to meet with President Trump because he has Ayatollah Khamenei looking over his shoulder, and Ayatollah Khamenei will not allow him to meet with President Trump. And, of course, if Ayatollah Khamenei thinks his regime is in danger, he may change that tune. Of course, Iran fought an 8-year war with Iraq back in the 1980s, and Ayatollah Khomeini, his predecessor, the original supreme leader, said, of course, that he was not planning to sign any agreement or peace deal with Iraq or with anyone else. And the UN Security Council forced him to do that because they made the mistake of firing on tankers in the Gulf, and the Security Council said that's a no-no. And he ultimately signed the peace agreement and said, it's like drinking poison, but I have to do it. And he did. So, it's possible they changed their tune.
Well, they're going to have to do something because these sanctions, I mean, this is real serious stuff. And I remember the sanctions before the deal that Obama cut, but I don't think they involved companies that did business with Tehran that couldn't do business with us. Maybe I'm mistaken on that, but I don't think they were quite as severe as the president has reinstated them now. Hey, with us today, Eddie Yeranian. He is our man in the Middle East, and he is in Cairo live today. Iranian sanctions hitting the president, sending a tweet out, mincing no words, no uncertainty here. Edward, on these sanctions and the fact that it's basically a Trump zero tolerance policy. If you do business with Iran, he says you're not going to do business with the United States. What has been the reaction around the Middle East so far?
Well, the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates are supporting President Trump to the hilt with the sanctions and with the Iran policy in general. Israel, of course, is supporting the sanctions because it's annoyed about Iran's ballistic missile program, in addition to the fact that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and various proxy militias like Hezbollah and the Iraqi militias are on the border, almost on the border, very close to the Golan Heights. The Russians have said they've pushed them back. They're not really as close as perhaps the Israelis are claiming, but certainly Iran has used its missiles and its drones to sort of pepper Israel and tell them, hey, we're here. In case you didn't notice, Israelis have responded by bombing their drone base near Palmyra, as well as other missile programs. They apparently, I think, they didn't claim responsibility for it, but somebody knocked off the Syrian in charge of Syria's missile program, who worked with Iran. So a bit of tit for tat, and certainly this is a low-level conflict by proxy. The Saudis are fighting Iran by proxy in Yemen. The Yemeni Houthi militia, which Iran is supporting, has been shooting ballistic missiles at Saudi Arabia, which the UN has traced back to Iran. They've also put mines in the Gulf, in the Red Sea, and that affects tanker traffic. Somebody has also attacked several Saudi ships, which could ultimately affect oil traffic through the Red Sea. And Iran, of course, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard always threatens to close the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think they have the capacity to do that, but they could, of course, cause premiums to go up on shipping through the Gulf.
Well, yes. So basically the Saudis, UAE, the United Arab Emirates, who are aligned against Iran with the president, no question about that, they're in favor of these sanctions. So is Israel. No shocker there. The question goes to, what about the other states in the Gulf? Kuwait, Qatar.
Kuwait is on the fence because they have a large Shiite population and they don't want to anger Iran. They're close to Iran. Qatar is an ally of Iran. They have pretty much supported Iran, while belonging to the Gulf Cooperation Council over the years. They've still had fairly close ties, good relations with Iran. So they're against these sanctions. All you have to do is listen to Jazeera TV to pick that up. And Oman is sort of a middleman because Omanis are Persian rather than Arab, and they've sort of served as intermediaries between the U.S. and Iran. They are still doing that. The Omani foreign minister met with the Iranian leaders, with the president, and I assume with the supreme leader, and he went back to Washington or is going back to Washington. So I think there is some negotiation going on. And as for the others, of course, Yemen is divided. Part of it is under Saudi control, and of course they're supporting President Trump, and the Houthis, of course, are not supporting President Trump. Egypt is on the side of President Trump because President Sisi has been an ally of the U.S. president. And the other Arab regimes, well, of course, Syria is not a big fan of sanctions on Iran. Iran is supporting Syria, or at least the Syrian government. And the other states, well, Turkey does a lot of business with Iran, so I think they'd like to find some exemptions for the trade that they do with Iran. But you can see the markets are taking effect because the Turkish lira has fallen to new lows. I think it was 5.7 to the dollar, which it was only trading like 3.5 to the dollar a couple years ago.
Right.
So obviously the market is telling Turkey that, you're not going to be able to trade with Iran, so your currency is going down.
So basically, the most interesting country in this mix, because everything you outlined, you can pretty much see why. Qatar, obviously, they do a lot of trade with Tehran, so they're not going to be excited about this. But Turkey is in a very, very unique position because they're kind of like dancing on the edge here, right? They want very much, Erdogan wants very much to maintain his relationship with Trump and the United States, and they've been at odds over some issues. But on the other hand, they do trade with Tehran as well. And that, to me, is the most complicated country in this mix. Don't you agree?
Yes, I think Turkey is in trouble. First of all, because of Pastor Andrew Branson, who they've imprisoned unfairly, I believe, for allegedly supporting the Kurdish PKK and allegedly supporting the coup attempt in Turkey, which I don't think he had anything to do with. At least people that know him have said he doesn't play politics like that. But anyway, the U.S. has put sanctions on several Turkish ministers, and just the mere talk of those sanctions, which I don't think are really going to affect those people in question, the Interior Minister or Defense Minister, are going to are putting pressure on the Turkish currency. And Turkey has threatened to, buy air defense systems from Russia and to move over to Russia rather than working with NATO. But of course, really, those are empty, hollow threats. And I think he's in trouble. Mr. Erdogan is in trouble because his currency is going down the tubes right now. So he's seeing what the price is that you have to pay when you go against the United States.
It is a steep price to pay, and why Turkey hasn't released this pastor is sometimes you look at international relations as a layman on the outside, like I do, and you shake your head. I mean, I'm sure there's some internal government political reason why this pastor is being held, but, why the president of Turkey just wouldn't, go there himself and get the guy out and fly him home first class is absolutely beyond me. I mean, it just makes no sense sometimes what governments do because we don't know what the internal pressure is. But I mean, do you think holding this pastor for the Turkish government makes any sense at all? I got 10 seconds.
Yes, well, Erdogan is saying we want his nemesis, his enemy, who's in Pennsylvania, the Turkish.
One has nothing to do. One has nothing to do with the other, and this guy needs to get released. I'm out of time, Eddie Yeranian. Great segment, Eddie. Thank you very much. You are the man.